In this video, we're going to examine the birth date of John the Baptist. John is born on August 25th, 7 BCE. When you go back to November 18, 8 BCE, when he was conceived, the number of days between those two dates is 280 normal gestation human days. We find that it's now 12:42 in the afternoon when this new moon occurs, and the sign that he's in is the Virgo, which represents Israel. We have a sun at her head, a Mercury bright planet at her elbow in the middle, and Venus, a brighter planet, at her feet. And the verse says, Luke chapter 1, verse 79, to give light to them that sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. The entire Virgo is covered in light from head to foot. The whole of the Virgo Israel is filled with light in the moment that John is born. And this is the verse, along with several other verses preceding this, that describe the life of John the Baptist and what he accomplishes. And of course, he is preparing the way of the Lord, bringing light to people, getting them educated, getting them aware of their Old Testament again and the prophecies, letting them know that the Messiah is about to arrive. We had learned that the conception of Jesus to the birth of John now would be May 29, conception of Jesus, to the August 25th, 7 BCE, which amounts to 88 days, about 3 months. That's the verse, Luke 1, 56 and 57. And Mary abode with her about 3 months. Then she returned to her own house. That returning took place within very close proximity to Elizabeth's full time. Came that she should be delivered, and she brought forth a son. Now, it would seem the most normal and logical to me that the entire purpose of Mary going to visit Elizabeth is to actually help her out with her pregnancy, during pregnancy. So it doesn't say Mary was there during the pregnancy, but in terms of normal human meaning and purpose, it would seem unusual that she goes to the trouble of being with Elizabeth for her entire third trimester to not actually be there to assist with the actual delivery. And so I think Mary is there through to the delivery. Hence, the 88 days, deduct a couple of days for travel, 86 days, about 3 months. The last time that Mary had contact with Elizabeth was around middle of April, when they were at the Passover in Jerusalem together. And this is, of course, where Mary learns that Elizabeth is pregnant, because Elizabeth announces it at the Passover. That's why Elizabeth waited the 5 months. And then a couple of weeks after that, April 29, Gabriel visits Mary. And then 2 weeks after that, May 13, Mary is overshadowed. It's at night. She has no awareness. Then May 29th, which is about 3 months to the birth of John the Baptist, Mary conceives. Again, it's in the middle of the night, and she immediately goes in haste to visit Elizabeth. And when we look at the details of the verses, we're going to find this is the case. And just before we do that, we're just going to mention John the Baptist came to prepare the way of the Lord. And we noticed all the similarities between the conception of John and the conception of Jesus, with the exception that John's signs seem to indicate a male time frame during the conjugation process and a female time frame. highlighting a normal human conception process, whereas Jesus has a 16-day period between the overshadowing and the conception day. So there's no sort of distinct male time frame. There's just this one large 16-day time frame. Because of all the similarities, Gabriel visits both Zacharias and Mary. There's a 16-day period in both cases. Both cases have a lunar eclipse. In both cases, the sign is a full moon at the left foot of the Gemini twin figure for John and a new moon at the left foot of the Gemini figure for Jesus. They're both in the Gemini twins. One's a full moon, one's a new moon. The moon is involved in both. They both have 280-day gestation periods. All of these similarities are confirming for us that this is the proper conception of Jesus because it follows the pattern of the conception signs for John. And this is how, even in the signs, John prepares the way of the Lord. His signs and understanding the John conception signs prepares us to understand the Jesus conception signs because of all the similarities. Jesus conception signs are following on the path that was laid down by the John conception signs. And that is a fascinating facet of the conception signs of Jesus. Finally, Mary speaks with the angel, April 29, and the angel departs. And then it says, and Mary arose in those days. So that was 30 days. Because we know that she rose in those days to go into the hill country in haste to where Elizabeth lives. In those days is 30 days has transpired. We're now May 29th. We know that when Mary enters the house of Zacharias, the first thing she does is she salutes Elizabeth. And she doesn't say anything else. That's all she says. And then as soon as Elizabeth hears the salutation, Elizabeth is filled with the Holy Spirit, and John the Baptist leaps in her womb, who is also now filled with the Holy Spirit. She speaks out and prophesies, right, with a loud voice, saying, "Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb." So Mary hasn't said a word yet. All Mary has said is the salutation. But it's Elizabeth that's telling Mary, "You're pregnant." And Mary doesn't even know she's pregnant. She didn't even know, because everything happened while she was asleep. And not only is she pregnant, but Elizabeth says, "And when says this to me, that the mother of my Lord?" She knows, because she's been filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, that Mary is carrying the Messiah. And she explains that as soon as she hears the salutation, John the Baptist leaped in her womb for joy. And then she goes on. Elizabeth, of course, has no idea that the angel Gabriel had visited Mary. But here she is telling Mary. Mary hasn't said a word yet. She's just given the salutation. And Elizabeth is speaking this whole time. And Elizabeth now is saying, "For there shall be a performance of those things which were told her from the Lord." She's telling Mary that the angel Gabriel visited her. So all the things that Mary wants to tell Elizabeth, Elizabeth already knows by being imbued by the power of the Holy Spirit. And she's telling them all to Mary before Mary gets a chance. And some of the things she's telling Mary are news to Mary that she's actually pregnant. And so this is confirming that the signs we saw for Mary, the overshadowing, was between 10 p.m. and midnight. Mary had no idea. that the conception took place around 4 a.m. Again, Mary had no idea. Mary goes in haste not to tell Elizabeth, I'm pregnant, because she doesn't even know she's pregnant yet. She goes in haste to visit Elizabeth because they were together at the Passover, of course, and Mary was part of all the excitement of the announcement that Elizabeth gave, and of course she was showing. And so Mary wants to go help her elderly cousin out during the last trimester of the pregnancy, and she more than likely stays right through to the delivery. And that's the basic sign and story of John the Baptist being born at the 280 gestation period, which is not surprising because God built all of the lunar cycle on a human gestation period, because eventually Jesus and John would have appointed times, which are always new moon, full moon, are the only valid appointed times of things of righteousness. There's at least one instance of an unrighteous thing that includes a moon which is just a partial moon, which is an antichrist sign, and so it doesn't get. It's called a lying sign, an antichrist sign, which happened in 2017. I'll have a separate video on that. This is the wonderful story of Mary and Elizabeth and the birth of John the Baptist, who brought light into the world. The power of the Holy Spirit being given to him while he was a child, in greater measure than was received by Elijah. And so John is a very mighty person. We hear very little about him, but I think in the kingdom you'll learn he was much mightier than you imagine in his faith and in his preaching and in his courage. In our next video, we're going to take a small step back in time, and we're going to be looking at the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, May 22nd, 7 BCE. This is happening and beginning 7 days before the conception of Jesus. What we're going to find is that this conjunction has the appearance of Jupiter and Saturn remaining close together. They split apart slightly and then they come back together and they overlap 3 times in a 280-day period where the event concludes. And we had a great conjunction December 21 of 2020 recently. Now in this case, they came close together and one just passed the other. In the case of Jesus, it remained for, in terms of a sign, as long as a human gestation period. 280 days where 2 planets stay relatively close together for 280 days, when usually one would just pass the other quickly, so fast that no one would ever see it or notice it, just about. This chart tells you a little bit about the conjunction. They will pass each other from time to time, every 20 years, but they won't necessarily be close together. They were not this close until back in 1623. They do pass each other every 20 years. Jupiter goes around the sun once every 12 years. That means Jupiter is in a different astronomical constellation sign once every year, a new one every year. Saturn, on the other hand, has an orbital period of almost 30 years. And so it takes a while for them to ever pass each other, around every 20 years. And you can see what's happening by the pictures here. The line of sight from the Earth to Jupiter to Saturn is a straight line of sight, where on here in this case in December 21, you can see they're overlapping enough so that becomes the closest point. And here the line of sight makes them overlap and look like one bright star. Planets are all called wandering stars, and when they overlap, they will look brighter than normal. And of course, Jupiter and Saturn are the two largest planets, and they're bright by themselves. And of course, if they come close together, that magnifies their brightness. In the case of Jesus, it's not just that they've come close together. They have to come close together, and the background constellation has to be a certain constellation. So Jupiter is in only one constellation each year, and they may overlap in many other constellations at other times, but the only one that represents the year is when they overlap, and not only do you see them as one star, but in the background it has to be in the watery place, which is the constellation Pisces. I also call that, and you'll see later why, the safe place. It's the safe place and the watery place, the place where Jesus is born.